Hi, I'm Michael Dye. I'm the founder of the Genesis Processes and Programs. In this video series, we're going to look at trying to explain and uncover some of this mystery of why us as human beings have such self-destructive behavior. But before we start into what is Genesis, I'd like to explain some of the resources we have and some of the books. This first book, which was the original book written. Now this book is not a self-help book. It's usually used in residential recovery for people with severe addictions, and it creates a treatment plan for relapse prevention, and also really gets to some healing of the issues that are driving the addiction. And it is designed to be gone through with a Genesis counselor, and people who come to the 40-hour full counselor trainings, that they'll receive this counselor manual, which takes them through this process page by page and how to take a client. And when I say most of this is being used in residential recovery and in some private practice. The next books that I wrote were these two books, which are the Genesis process for groups, for change groups. And there's a group process, and it can be done without people being a trained counselor or going through the Genesis counselor process. And so there's book 1 and book 2. And it really is designed for people who really want to change but haven't been able to change. And along with that series, there are facilitators' guides so that lay people or professionals can take people through these change groups. And they're mostly church-based groups, and we're using it quite a bit in prison. And actually these books have been translated into about 12 languages now. What's exciting about Genesis is that it's a blend of biblical principles, some recovery tools, and some of the new understanding of the brain. Okay? And it really is the first time in history that we can really answer the question from Romans 7 that Paul talks about when he says, I do the very thing I don't want to do. And it's interesting because Paul has some of the strongest attributes that we have as human beings. He had intelligence, he had willpower, he had good intentions, he had tremendous amount of faith. Okay? But when it came to this self-destructive or sinful behavior, none of these things worked for him. And a lot of our recovery programs are based on trying harder, being smart, simulating information, good intentions, and faith. And so Paul says, he says, in my mind, I want to serve the law of God. Okay? But in my behavior, I continue to do the very thing I don't want to do. Then he makes an interesting statement. He says, if I'm doing the very thing I don't want to do, it's not me doing it. He says it's sin in me doing it. Well, if it's not him doing it, then who is doing it? But what Paul is trying to say, he says that there's something in me that's stronger than the me I'm aware of that causes me to do the very thing I don't want to do. And of course, in psychology, this is where Freud, so many other psychologists have discovered this thing they call the unconscious or the subconscious mind. And they know that there's something in us that is subconscious that controls our emotions and our behaviors and causes us to, in many cases, be addicted and self-destructive. So let me give you a short history of Genesis so you kind of understand where it comes from. I've been actually working in the field for over 40 years, 30 years of it as a Christian, and before that I spent 13 years in the 60s, 70s hippie movement. And I studied with gurus all over the world. I practiced most of the world's religions. I probably took every kind of mind-expanding drug for cosmic conscious awareness. I was in the occult, in metaphysics, and at the end of that period, I really pretty much discovered just one thing, which of course is the foundation of this dilemma of addiction, is no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't change myself. And then 30 years ago, when I became a Christian, my wife and I, we really started to focus on working with people who wanted to change, mostly addicts, alcoholics, homosexuals. We were missionaries for 15 years. We, worked in many different countries with people who were addicted and, in different stages of the destructiveness of that addiction. Many of the people we worked with came to us for help. Many of them ended up relapsing and going back to prison. Some of them died. And this one question continued to plague me the whole way through this learning process, is this: as human beings, when we want to change, why aren't we able to change? When circumstances and problems in our life have been so painful that we want to give them up and we don't want to do them anymore, then why haven't we been able to change? And there's a question we begin with when I do the weekend seminars, is this: is that why are we the only creatures in the observable universe that will continue to do a self-destructive behavior in spite of the consequences? We will overeat, overwork, overstress, oversex, over drug and alcohol ourselves, even to the point of death, and not change. Even an ant is smarter than that. Think about it. When an ant does something that hurts himself or his colony, he'll learn and he'll avoid it. But we will continue to do these things with a knowledge of how bad it is for us, our input from God and our conscience, from the people around us who are worried and being affected by these problems and addictions, yet we won't stop, and we'll do it even to the point of death. So what is it that is so different about us than every other creature in the universe, where our society and our world, where we're just, everything we do is just causing us to be worse and worse? And in our country, in the United States, there's even a further mystery, is we are the most self-destructive society that's ever lived. We have more people in prison, more people with addictions, we have more obesity and healthcare issues, and we are the most affluent society that's ever lived, and we are the most self-destructive. So the easier we have it, for some reason, the worse we become. So Genesis looks at an addiction in more of a biblical way, but not only from a biblical way, but also because now we understand what's broken, in how to help people get well. So we look at it as an addiction as a symptom, not as a cause. For example, gluttony in food, our anger, our anxiety, drugs and alcohol. Are those causes or they are symptoms? Well, obviously, they're symptoms. They're symptoms of what, though? So, why am I such an angry person? Why do I overstress and overwork myself to death? Those are symptoms of something that it's coping with. And this is what in Genesis, where people really make breakthroughs, is we call it name the sucker. In other words, why do you eat when you're not hungry? Once you name and understand why you do the things you don't want to do, that's where your recovery begins. So, another important part of this learning how to overcome addictions is this concept of working on what drives addictions rather than just trying to control the behavior. And if you give up an addiction and you don't deal with what is driving the addiction, you have to just find a new way to cope, because what your addiction was coping with hasn't changed, right? So you have to find a new way to cope with it, and we call that, trading one addiction for another. And another way of putting it is they used to call it is changing seats on the Titanic. You may get into a better place, but you're still going down. And unfortunately, a lot of the people we work with end up trading an addiction for something even a worse addiction. And So we're going to look in this series of not only what is broken and understanding this mystery of self-destructive behavior, but we're also going to look at what it takes to actually heal. And it really is kind of a biblical model of freedom and recovery. The New Testament doesn't say that we're going to just have to cope with trying to control our sinful behaviors all our lives and our destructive behaviors. It says that there's a freedom, that we can be free in such a way that we're just not trying to set up a lifestyle of trying to control my behaviors, but there's changes that can happen deep within us that can really set us free, so that we experience that the New Testament life that is available to us in there. And that's what Genesis focuses on, and we've had tremendous success, and there is hope. Okay? So as you go through this series, stop the video sometimes and maybe think about some of the things I'm saying, and in the next video, video number 2, we're going to look at, before we get into what's broken, we're going to look at some of the philosophies and ideas out there that can sabotage our ability to get free from addictions. We're going to look at not only what is an addiction, but we're going to look at the important concept: is addiction a sin or a moral failure, or is it a disease? Because that's important, because as you see it, you'll treat it. Okay? And so I'll see you in the next video.